A family in Texas spent $400,000 on their dream home, and within 18 months, the floors started sinking in one corner, while the walls cracked in a pattern that inspectors call the fingerprint of failure. Nobody had done anything wrong on the surface. The house looked flawless the day they moved in. But underneath that slab, a mistake had already been made, one that wouldn't show itself for over a year. And by the time it did, the damage was invisible no more. If you're the kind of person who wants to know what's really happening beneath the homes we live in, the mistakes that get buried, quite literally, before anyone notices, then this is exactly the kind of investigation you'll want to be part of every week. Subscribe now because we dig into real construction failures, the hidden ones that cost homeowners tens of thousands of dollars, and we break them down so you never have to learn these lessons the hard way. Most people never think about their foundation. It's the one part of the house nobody sees, buried under carpet, tile, and years of furniture. But a slab foundation isn't just a flat piece of concrete sitting on the ground. It's a carefully engineered system meant to carry the entire weight of a home, resist the movement of soil beneath it, and stay dry for decades. When it's done right, it disappears into the background of daily life. When it's done wrong, it becomes the most expensive problem a homeowner will ever face. At first, the signs are so small that almost nobody notices them. A hairline crack near a doorway, a door that used to close easily but now sticks a little, a slight unevenness in the kitchen floor that you only feel if you're walking barefoot. Homeowners brush these off as normal settling, the kind of thing every house experiences. And in many cases, that's true. But sometimes these tiny details are the first whisper of something much larger happening beneath the surface, something that started the day the concrete was poured. Here's where the story gets interesting. Before a single truck of concrete ever arrives at a job site, the ground itself has to be prepared. This step is invisible once the house is built, but it determines almost everything that happens afterward. The soil needs to be compacted, meaning it has to be pressed down and stabilized so it won't shift or sink under the weight of a home. Builders use heavy machinery to compress the earth, layer by layer, until it can support tons of pressure without moving. But here's the problem. Compacting soil properly takes time, equipment, and careful attention, and time costs money. On a fast-moving construction schedule, especially in booming housing markets, some crews skip steps or rush through them, just enough to pass a quick visual inspection. The ground might look solid on the surface. It might even feel firm if you walk across it. But underneath, there can be soft pockets, unevenly compacted soil, or organic material like roots and debris that was never properly cleared away. This is where the silent countdown begins. A poorly compacted foundation bed doesn't fail immediately. It can take months, sometimes years, before the uneven pressure beneath the slab starts to show itself. And when it does, it doesn't happen gently. It happens in the form of cracks that spread across walls, floors that visibly slope, and doors and windows that stop lining up with their frames. What makes this mistake even more dangerous is that it's almost impossible to see once the home is built. There's no window into the ground beneath a slab. Homeowners are essentially trusting that everything below their feet was done correctly, without any way to verify it themselves. This is why choosing an experienced, reputable builder matters so much, because the corners that get cut during this invisible stage are the ones that come back to haunt people the most. But soil compaction is only the beginning of the story, because even if the ground beneath a slab is prepared perfectly, there's another silent threat working against every concrete foundation in America. And it's something most homeowners have never even heard of. It's moisture. Specifically, moisture that rises up from the ground into the concrete itself. A process professionals call vapor intrusion. Concrete might look like a solid, impenetrable barrier, but at a microscopic level, it's actually porous, filled with tiny channels that allow water vapor to travel through it, slowly, over time. If a foundation isn't built with the right protection, that moisture doesn't stay outside. It works its way upward, through the slab, and into the living space above. This is where a thin plastic sheet becomes one of the most important and most overlooked components of an entire home. It's called a vapor barrier, and it's supposed to be installed directly beneath the slab before the concrete is ever poured. When it's installed correctly, it blocks moisture from rising up through the ground and into the concrete. When it's missing, damaged, or installed incorrectly, with gaps, tears, or overlapping seams that were never properly sealed, the slab becomes a highway for hidden moisture. At first, nobody notices anything wrong. The floors look dry. The house smells fine. But months later, homeowners start finding that their hardwood floors are warping in random patterns. Tile grout begins to discolor. A musty smell starts creeping into certain rooms, especially ones with less airflow. And in the worst cases, mold begins growing silently inside walls and beneath flooring, completely hidden from view until someone finally pulls up the floor to investigate. This is one of those hidden dangers that doesn't just cost money to fix. It can genuinely affect the health of the people living in the home. Mold spores, triggered by trapped moisture, have been linked to respiratory issues, especially in children and people with existing sensitivities. And by the time it's discovered, the fix often means tearing out entire sections of flooring, professional mold remediation, and in severe cases, going back down to the slab itself. Professionals who understand this problem take the vapor barrier seriously. On a properly managed job site, that plastic sheeting isn't just laid down loosely, it's overlapped at every seam, taped to prevent gaps, and inspected before concrete is poured over it. It's a small detail that takes extra time and costs a little more up front, but it's the difference between a foundation that stays dry for 50 years and one that quietly rots the home from below. But even a perfectly compacted lot and a flawless vapor barrier can't save a foundation from what might be the most underestimated threat of all, something that lives right outside every single home in America: the soil itself. Not all dirt is created equal. Some soil, especially clay-heavy soil, found throughout huge parts of the country, has a strange and frustrating property. It expands when it gets wet, and it shrinks when it dries out. Imagine the ground beneath your home slowly swelling after a heavy rain, then contracting again during a dry summer, over and over, year after year. Now imagine a rigid concrete slab sitting directly on top of that constantly moving surface. This is where the real danger begins to reveal itself. As the soil expands and contracts unevenly across different parts of a property, it pushes and pulls on the foundation from below. One side of the house might sit on soil that stayed relatively stable, while another side sits above soil that swelled dramatically after a rainy season. The result is a foundation that doesn't move as one solid piece. Instead, different sections rise and fall independently, creating stress that concrete was never designed to absorb gracefully. Most homeowners never notice this happening in real time because it unfolds so slowly. But engineers who specialize in foundation repair say the evidence is everywhere once you know what to look for. Cracks that run diagonally from the corners of doors and windows, uneven gaps where baseboards no longer sit flush against the floor, a noticeable slope you can feel by placing a marble on the floor and watching which direction it rolls. This is exactly what happened to that family whose story opened this investigation. Their home was built during an especially wet season, and the soil beneath one side of the slab absorbed significantly more moisture than the other. As the seasons changed and the ground dried unevenly, one corner of the foundation began sinking almost imperceptibly, just a few millimeters at a time. It took over a year before the shift became visible enough for anyone to notice. By then, the damage had already spread through multiple rooms. Here's where professionals do something that most people never think about before building a home. In areas known for expansive clay soil, experienced foundation engineers don't just pour a standard slab and hope for the best. They design what's called a post-tensioned slab, a foundation reinforced internally with steel cables that are tightened after the concrete cures, creating enormous compressive strength that helps the slab resist the pushing and pulling forces of shifting soil. This single engineering decision, made months before a homeowner ever steps foot in their new house, can be the difference between a foundation that lasts generations and one that requires costly repairs within the first decade. But here's the twist that catches so many buyers off guard. Not every builder uses this reinforcement, especially in production-built neighborhoods where speed and cost efficiency often take priority over long-term durability. This raises the stakes even further, because the visible parts of a home, the paint, the countertops, the landscaping, tell buyers almost nothing about what's happening structurally beneath their feet. Two houses can look completely identical on moving day, yet one might be protected by proper reinforcement and drainage planning, while the other is essentially waiting for the wrong combination of rain and drought to expose a serious weakness. And that leads directly into another mistake that plays a much bigger role in foundation problems than most people realize, something that has nothing to do with the concrete itself. It's water management around the outside of the home. Every home needs a way to move rainwater away from its foundation. This might sound obvious, but it's one of the most commonly overlooked details in residential construction, and it's often something homeowners themselves accidentally make worse after moving in. The ground around a foundation is supposed to slope downward, away from the house, so that rainwater flows out into the yard instead of pooling against the base of the walls. When that slope, called grading, is done correctly, water sheds away naturally every time it rains. But when a lot is graded incorrectly, either by a rushed construction crew or by landscaping added years later, water begins collecting right at the edge of the foundation. Over time, this creates a cycle of saturation and drying directly beneath the slab, dramatically accelerating the same soil movement problems we just talked about. This is where gutters and downspouts become far more important than most people give them credit for. A downspout that empties directly next to the foundation, instead of channeling water several feet away, can quietly dump hundreds of gallons of water into the same small patch of soil every single time it rains. Multiply that across dozens of storms every year, and you start to understand why some foundations fail, while nearly identical homes down the street remain stable for decades. What's especially frustrating about this mistake is that it's completely preventable, and often completely invisible until it's too late. Homeowners rarely think to check where their downspouts are draining or whether their yard slopes correctly toward the street. It simply isn't something most people are taught to look for. But professional inspectors say it's one of the very first things they check when investigating slab movement, because water is the single most common trigger behind expansive soil problems. But there's one more hidden culprit that even experienced homeowners rarely suspect. Something that seems completely unrelated to construction at first glance. Trees. Large trees planted too close to a foundation can cause serious problems over time, and the reason comes down to something surprisingly simple. Tree roots are constantly searching for water. During dry periods, those roots can extend much farther than most people realize, sometimes reaching well beneath a home's foundation in search of moisture. As they draw water out of the surrounding soil, they can cause the ground beneath one section of a slab to dry out and shrink, while the rest of the foundation stays relatively stable. This creates the exact same kind of uneven movement we discussed earlier, except this time the cause isn't rainfall or poor grading. It's a beautiful, mature tree that was planted a little too close to the house, years before anyone thought to ask how far its root system might eventually reach. Landscaping decisions that seem purely aesthetic can end up playing a direct role in structural problems that show up years, sometimes decades, later. This is exactly why professionals recommend maintaining distance between large trees and a home's foundation, often suggesting a gap equal to at least the tree's expected mature height. It's a detail that has nothing to do with concrete quality, rebar, or vapor barriers, and yet it can undo all of that careful engineering if it's ignored. There's one more hidden detail buried inside a slab foundation that almost no homeowner ever thinks about, and it's arguably the most invisible mistake of all, because it's literally sealed inside solid concrete. Underneath many slab homes, especially older ones, the plumbing lines that carry water in and out of the house run directly beneath the concrete itself. When those pipes are installed correctly, they can last for decades without a single issue. But when a plumber makes a small mistake, an improperly sealed joint, a slightly cracked fitting, or a pipe that wasn't protected from the pressure of settling soil, it can lead to a slow, hidden leak that nobody notices for months, sometimes years. Because the leak is happening beneath a solid slab, there's no obvious puddle to find, no dripping sound to alert anyone. Instead, homeowners might notice a mysteriously warm spot on the floor if it's a hot water line, a spike in their water bill that doesn't match their usage, or a faint, unexplained dampness near a baseboard. By the time these clues are strong enough to investigate, water may have been seeping into the soil beneath the foundation for a long time, softening the ground in one concentrated area and creating the exact kind of uneven settling that leads to cracked walls and sloping floors. Finding a slab leak often requires specialized listening equipment that can detect the sound of water escaping through pipes buried under concrete, along with thermal imaging to spot unusual heat patterns from hot water lines. Once located, repairing it can mean cutting into the concrete to access the pipe directly, or in some cases, rerouting the plumbing entirely through the walls or ceiling to avoid going back under the slab at all. It's a repair nobody budgets for, precisely because it's a problem nobody can see coming. This is why some of the most experienced builders take an extra step that a lot of production crews skip entirely: pressure testing every single plumbing line before the concrete is ever poured over it. It's a simple process where pipes are filled with air or water and monitored for any drop in pressure, revealing hidden leaks or weak joints, while they're still easy and inexpensive to fix. Skipping this test might save a few hours on a construction schedule, but it can end up costing a homeowner thousands of dollars in repairs years down the road, all because of a joint that was never checked before it disappeared beneath the concrete forever. There's also a detail on the surface of the slab itself that most people walk across every day without ever noticing. Thin, straight lines cut into the concrete at regular intervals. These are called control joints, and they exist for a very specific reason. Concrete naturally shrinks slightly as it cures, and it continues to expand and contract with temperature changes for the rest of its life. Without a planned way to release that stress, the slab will crack wherever the pressure happens to build up the most, often in random, unattractive patterns across the middle of a room. Control joints solve this by giving the concrete a predetermined, weakened line to crack along instead, hidden in a straight groove where it's barely noticeable. When these joints are spaced correctly, based on the thickness of the slab and the size of each section, cracking is controlled and cosmetic. But when a crew skips this step, or spaces the joints too far apart to save time, the slab is left to crack wherever it wants. sometimes right through the middle of a living room floor in a jagged line that no amount of touch-up paint can hide. Now, here's where the story reaches its most costly turn. Because everything we've discussed so far, poor compaction, moisture intrusion, expansive soil, bad grading, aggressive tree roots, all of these problems tend to build on top of each other silently, for years, before a homeowner notices anything beyond a few small cracks. And by the time cracks become visible, floors become uneven, or doors stop closing properly, the underlying damage is often far more advanced than it appears on the surface. This is the part that costs homeowners the most money, because foundation repair is never simple, and it's rarely cheap. Depending on the severity, fixing a compromised slab foundation can involve installing steel or concrete piers deep into stable soil beneath the home, essentially creating a new support system to stabilize the structure from below. In less severe cases, engineers might use a process where specialized material is injected beneath the slab to lift and stabilize sunken sections. Either way, these repairs require specialized equipment, structural engineers, and permits, and the cost can escalate quickly depending on how much of the foundation is affected. What makes this even more painful for homeowners is what happens to the value of their home once foundation problems become known. Even after repairs are completed, many buyers and lenders view a documented foundation issue as a red flag, sometimes reducing resale value or complicating future financing, even when the repair itself was done professionally and permanently solved the problem. This is why catching these issues early, or better yet, preventing them entirely during construction, matters so much more than people realize when they're simply excited to move into a new home. So what does it actually look like when this is done right? Professionals who specialize in slab foundations follow a completely different process than crews who are simply trying to finish a job as fast as possible. It starts with soil testing before construction even begins, sending samples to a lab to determine exactly how expansive the clay content is, and what kind of foundation design the specific lot requires. From there, proper compaction is verified using equipment that measures density, not just visual inspection. The vapor barrier is installed with taped seams and checked before concrete pouring begins. Reinforcement, whether it's steel rebar or post-tensioned cables, is calculated based on the engineering report, not a generic standard applied to every house in a neighborhood, regardless of soil conditions. And after the home is built, the responsibility doesn't simply end. Smart homeowners maintain consistent moisture levels around their foundation, avoiding the extremes of oversaturation or complete dryness, by watering the soil evenly during drought conditions, especially in regions with heavy clay content. They keep gutters clean and downspouts extended away from the house. They monitor for early warning signs, small cracks, sticking doors, uneven floors, and address them early before minor settling turns into a major structural problem. Looking back at that family in Texas, the tragedy of their situation wasn't that foundation problems are impossible to prevent. It's that almost every mistake that led to their sinking corner and cracking walls could have been avoided with a handful of decisions made months before they ever moved in. Better soil testing, verified compaction, a vapor barrier installed with real attention to detail, reinforcement designed specifically for their region's clay soil, proper grading around the perimeter of the home. It wasn't one catastrophic failure that caused their problem. It was a series of small, invisible shortcuts that quietly stacked on top of each other until the consequences became impossible to ignore. And that's really the biggest lesson buried inside every one of these stories. The most expensive mistakes in construction are almost never the ones you can see. They're the ones hidden beneath the surface, made in the earliest, quietest stages of building a home, long before anyone moves in furniture or hangs a single picture on the wall. A house can look absolutely perfect on the day you buy it, and still be carrying a problem that won't reveal itself for years. If there's one thing worth remembering from all of this, it's that a strong home isn't just about what you can see above ground. It's about everything that happens below it: the soil, the moisture, the reinforcement, the drainage, all working together in ways most people never think to ask about. The homeowners who avoid these disasters aren't lucky. They're informed, and they know which questions to ask before the concrete is ever poured. There are dozens of other hidden construction stories just like this one, failures that started small and quietly grew into something far more expensive, waiting to be uncovered. If you want to keep learning the warning signs before they cost you thousands, stick around, because next time we open up another investigation into the parts of a home nobody thinks to check until it's too late.